Johnny hadn't been to the circus for the past 2 years. His dad refused to take him after what happened last time. It had been a great evening. Johnny had seen elephants, high wire acts, and even had his fortune told. In case you were wondering, his future looked bright and happy. However, about an hour before closing time, as people started to leave and the circus grounds emptied out, Johnny had followed the bearded lady, hoping to get a better look. It was only about 5 minutes later that he realized he was lost. He appeared to be around the tents and carriages that the performer stayed while the circus was set up and running. Most of them looked the same to him, and he quickly became more and more confused. It wasn't until he rounded a carriage with the label, the Great Carvacian, that he saw the bright lights of the big top. It couldn't have come soon enough. Truth be told, he was on the verge of tears. He let out a sigh of relief. Too soon. Just as he was about to enter the clearing, a shadow emerged in front of him, blocking his path to freedom. It was a strange shadow. The feet appeared enormous, the body large and obese, the ears and nose abnormal. Johnny's breath caught in his lungs as the creature who owned this shadow stepped in front of him. He heard his name over and over again. Shouts of help rang out in his ears, but he couldn't quite focus his hearing or his eyes. Slowly, he began to focus, and the blurriness in his eyes retracted. He was on the ground, looking up into his father's eyes. His father smiled with relief and called out to the group which had descended on us that I was fine. His boy was going to be fine. A large, gloved hand reached out and patted his father on the back. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I just came from around the back of Carvacian's carriage and saw your boy. Honestly, I didn't do anything. He just collapsed. I'm so sorry." His father looked back at the man and assured him it wasn't his fault. Probably just the hot summer air or low blood sugar. The man gently squatted down next to his father, his face coming into focus. It was him. It was that thing he saw. Johnny screamed and wailed. He shut his eyes hard and pulled his face into his father's chest. His father comforted him and looked at the man next to him. The clown looked back with a look of surprise and regret. That was all in the past. Johnny had gotten over his fear of clowns. Sure, they were still kinda creepy, but after the man had taken off his makeup and costume, Johnny knew it was just a gag. It was just make-believe, and there was nothing to fear. It was early October. The year was 1998, and Johnny was at Herman Fuller's circus of the disquieting. Truth be told, this didn't seem like the last circus. He couldn't put his finger on it, but things seemed stranger here. For one, there were a lot more freaks than was typical. His father had told him about P.T. Barnum and the oddities that used to be in those shows. He'd also told him those days were done and gone. It seemed Mr. Fuller hadn't received the memo. Nonetheless, he was determined to have a good time. He wasn't going to let a little clown phobia ruin this night. People were circulating around the various acts and sideshows, the sounds of parents laughing and kids screaming, with joy and perhaps a little fear, was all around. What was that? A new act Johnny hadn't heard of? He saw a man that looked to be dressed in a scientist coat, surrounded with what looked to be some kind of law enforcement. They had protective clothing on, and though he didn't see any weapons, they didn't look like they were unarmed either. They all had some badges on them, which looked like a circle with 3 arrows pointing to the middle. Of course, it was some sort of act. It made perfect sense. Must be a new sort of show. It was a circus after all, and they thrived on performance art. The men moved off into the distance. They appeared to be looking for something or someone. As the night wore on, Johnny had seen all sorts of weird and wonderful things. It was shortly after having a hot dog that he told his dad he needed to use the restroom. With hardly a notice, his dad smiled and said, Sure, I'll be over at the Amazon tents. If you can't see me, just look out for the red balloon." Without another word, his dad was off, red balloon in hand, seemingly very interested in that act. With a shrug, Johnny headed to the bathroom stalls. It was a little walk to find them. They were near a back corner, assumedly to keep the smell, drunks, and smokers away from the main areas. As Johnny finished and headed out of the bathroom, he heard laughter. It seemed quite far away still, but there it was again. He flushed the toilet and walked out to the continued sound of laughter, but now it sounded more strained. It was hard to describe, but it was as if the person laughing wanted to stop, or somehow couldn't stop laughing. The laughter continued, more and more pained. At that moment, something flew by his face and hit the wall just behind him. He fell back to the floor and turned his head to see what he had narrowly avoided. What was that? Was it a cream pie? Had someone just thrown a cream pie at him? Another, this time on his other side. Some practical joke. Probably those guys laughing were throwing them at him. But their laughter didn't sound very funny anymore. He looked around and could see nothing. He seemed to be all alone. Then he saw it. That thing he had been waiting to see all night. It was just a shadow with the moonlight behind it, but he knew what it was. A clown. It walked towards him and laughed. Johnny screamed out, "That's not funny!" It just continued walking towards him, giggling and laughing. Johnny called out again, "Stop it! I'll tell my father about this if you don't!" The clown just kept coming. Johnny could feel the fear in him rising up again. It's just a clown, a person in a suit. It's just a clown, a person in a suit. He tried to control his nerves, but he could feel his heartbeat rising into his throat. He didn't have to face this clown. He could run. With that thought, he jumped to his feet and took off as fast as he could. Back to the big tent, back to his dad, back to the crowds where it was safe. He heard something zoom past his head, but he kept running, not daring to look. That horrible laughter faded away. Where was the Amazon exhibit? He looked high and low, but couldn't find it. There were people everywhere, and he couldn't see where his dad had disappeared off to. In the corner of his eye, he caught that scientist and his agents, apparently now in a rush, heading in the direction he had just come from. The direction of the cream pie clown, and her laughter. Whatever, that was all behind him now. As he wandered about through the crowd searching for his dad, he caught a glimpse of a man disappear into a large tent. He ran over and saw the sign on the tent, Route 666. The last thing he wanted was some sort of scary ride or passage, but he needed to find his dad and get out of here. It was dark and smelled damp. Everything was lit in red light with eerie howls coming over a cheap sound system. On his left was what looked like a haunted house. On his right, a graveyard. He progressed on, sure his father couldn't have made it that far inside. After all, he was only a minute or two ahead of him. He yelled out for his father, "Dad!" After a moment, he heard a reply. It was faint. It sounded like his name. It seemed to be coming from a little deeper in the ride. He cautiously moved on. He turned the corner to find a beach. It was dark, littered with garbage. The water looked putrid and stagnant, and a terrible makeshift shark fin was cutting through the water. In the middle was an umbrella, a towel on the sand, and a beach ball lying in the sand. He was sure the sound had come from here. He walked onto the sand and looked around. There is nothing here, and no place to hide. He must be hearing things. In his frustration, he kicked the beach ball, only for it to stay in place and wobble. He fell down with a start. The beach ball was attached to the ground? Why? What for? Then, the sand started to shift. Something was under that beach ball. It was under the sand. A hand came out of the sand and started to push itself upright. The left hand then came out, but it was engorged and bloated. The body started to rise out of the sand. That's when he realized it wasn't a beach ball at all. It was a distended, obese and disgusting belly. The creature's skin was yellow with polka dots. Its mouth was large and lipless. It had no eyes, only empty sockets, and its nose was huge and red. It sat up and looked at him with blank sockets. With its large hand, it slapped its belly, and with its right, it honked its nose. It was a clown. The scariest clown Johnny had ever seen. He scrambled backwards as that thing got to its feet. It must have been 2.5 meters tall. Johnny turned onto his knees and scrambled forward as fast as he could, screaming and crying. He ran back the way he came. As he broke forth from the tent, he found the circus quiet. Hardly anybody was around, and the lights were being turned off. He felt trapped. He didn't know what was happening, and where was his father? He looked around and saw nothing. Where was everyone? There! In the distance, he saw the red balloon. Dad. He took off at a run, tears streaming down his face. Finally, his dad would believe him and take him home. He dashed around one tent, then another, his eyes on the sky and the balloon. He tripped and fell. Didn't matter. He was up and off again. He was almost there. He yelled out, "Dad! Dad!" as he rounded the final tent. He came skidding to a halt in the dirt. As he looked up, he saw the balloon, but no Dad. It was floating and bouncing feet away from him, but tethered to a pole. It had what looked like hands and feet poking out of it. What kind of weird balloon was this? It bounced and danced and slowly rotated. As it spun around, Johnny's mouth opened wide. It had a head. It wasn't a balloon at all. It was a clown. It looked down at Johnny and opened its mouth. Its tongue extended like a lizard as its body floated and bobbed. Just at that moment, someone or something grabbed him from behind and pulled him away. The last thing he saw before fainting was that scientists and his agents rushing towards the balloon clown. Please explain what you were doing prior to your apprehension. Listen, face, I don't go to your job and pull the anomalous cock out of your I got work to do, and Mr. Fuller ain't exactly the most patient bloke. So you're a member of Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting? Yeah, what's it to you? What is your profession? Clown breeder. Excuse me? You deaf? I'm a motherfucking clown breeder. How exactly does one become a clown breeder? My father was a clown breeder. My father's father was a clown breeder. My father's father's father? Well, he was a horse beater. And what does this job actually entail? You that f***ing stupid? It's in the goddamn name. Enlighten me. I breed clowns. I see. Is this an old profession? You mentioned your father and grandfather. Well, in the real old days, you didn't have no breeders. Back then the best we had was child breakers. Child breakers? What? You think all freaks are just born that way? Body does a lot of growing when young. Just gotta help it along a certain path. Of course, back then you could only make a hunchback. Nah, they deserve more credit. I mean, the Laughing Man, Turtle Boy, hell, the Inside Out Girl, they was done the old way. What do they eat? Circus peanuts, purple water, and what exactly is that? Jeez. Marshmallows, has to look like a peanut. And purple water is purple water. Use food dye. As you say, I think that is all we need at the moment. Thank you for your time. F*** you. Take them in. I want them in individual humanoid containment units. House them at Biological Containment Site 66. As for this guy, take him in too. What just happened? They just exploded. All three of them. You f***ing shit-eaters forgot to milk the clowns, didn't you? Way to ruin a decade of work, you About time you got here. Is that a smile or a frown? I can never tell with you. A liability? Come on. I'm the best clown breeder you got, and Mr. Fuller knows it. Well, I hope you enjoyed SCP-2912, Clowny Clown Clown. The next time you see a clown, will it be enjoyable or life-threatening? As always, have a care and remember to subscribe, like, and share, if you would. Until next time, farewell.